The Haas driver dilemma is a little bit boring. I am not gonna lie, it is a little bit boring because obviously in a season that started out exciting and we were talking about Max versus Charles, Red Bull versus the resurgent Ferrari, as it's petered out, it kind of happens in Formula 1 when we see seasons of dominance. More of the news agenda has been kind of outside of Formula 1, and especially with the driver market and all of the fiasco shenanigans over the summer. And apart from Williams, obviously Jos Capito announced that potentially it will be Logan Sargent if he gets the super license points. The only thing left to talk about really in Formula 1 in terms of that we don't know for next year is who's going to be in that other Haas seat for 2023. Now, the two drivers that are being considered for that seat in terms of either Mick Schumacher, who's obviously there now, or a potential return for Nico Hulkenberg after, three full seasons out of Formula 1 since 2019. Both of those options, I don't know about you, are not only a little bit boring, but also a little bit mid. And I mean that with all due respect, of course. They're both really good drivers, but it seems like in Formula 1, there isn't really an abundance of exciting talent. And I feel like that's partly the reason why Haas find themselves in this situation, choosing between two drivers where, in reality, I don't really think there's a win-win or a lose-lose. It's almost like which one of those two drivers is just going to get us to the end of 2023 with the least amount of drama. Now, this is going to be another one of my kind of longer style videos, maybe a little mini podcast. I do like to do these kind of once in a full moon just for fun, to kind of talk a little bit more than just about a specific topic for 10 or so minutes. And we are going to talk about not just the Haas situation, but kind of the lack of good drivers in Formula 1 in general, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. I do want to talk really quickly about the Haas situation because the reason why Haas find themselves in this situation is that they clearly don't trust, or they clearly don't know that Mick Schumacher is going to be the person that's going to be able to back someone like a Kevin Magnussen in 2023 to really propel them back up the grid. Haas have had a good season overall when you look at their 2020, 2021, even the beginning of this year with obviously the whole Mazepin situation. So overall, it's been a more positive season for Haas, and there have been some good results. Obviously, I think I still go back to Bahrain, seeing K-Mag score, I think that 5th place in his return was absolutely phenomenal, and it kind of really brought a good feeling to Haas again. But there has been so many bumps and so many kind of moments during the season where clearly Haas still have a long way to go, both in terms of their driver lineup, both in terms of their strategy, and also in terms of their car as well, because it hasn't developed throughout the season, which is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. And that's why they find themselves in almost this position where they're looking for a driver for 2023 that is just going to get them to the end of the season with a little bit less drama, hopefully going to be a consistent point scorer if they give him the car. So it's a really weird kind of situation for Haas. They don't also have this kind of rich kind of F2 program or junior program where they've got an abundance of young drivers where you can look and go, that guy's got unbelievable potential. And they also seem to be kind of shying away from taking other teams' junior drivers, even if it's a Ferrari driver or Mercedes driver. It obviously happened with Mick Schumacher, but they clearly, after, potentially being stung by how Mick has performed over the past 2 years, maybe they've kind of shied away from that a little bit. So Haas are kind of out on an iceberg, on an island by themselves, and unfortunately, they have been left with choosing between two drivers that there's not really too much excitement about them. None of them are going to be future world champions. It kind of looks, maybe Mick is going to develop into something, maybe even to a race winner or someone who could be capable of podiums, but it really does look like they're kind of all on thin ice and choosing between a rock and a hard place when it comes to both Mick Schumacher and Nico Hulkenberg. Now, I thought I'd actually go through really quickly both of those drivers, and first of all kind of say the case for Mick Schumacher and keeping him on, because it's a weird one with Mick Schumacher in terms of he has had such a rocky last 2 years or year and a half now. I'm almost going to ignore his rookie season. That was such a tumultuous time within Haas. Obviously, they were at the back of the grid. He was also a rookie. He did have a lot of shunts, and it was kind of, we didn't know it at the time, or maybe we did and we kind of just kind of chose to ignore it because it was his rookie season, but that was almost kind of the beginning of what carried over into 2022. And whilst you can get all of that out the way in your rookie season, and he obviously got confirmed for 2022 fairly early, I think it was at the Russian Grand Prix, so his future was kind of safe. It was a first indication that Mick still was a very, very rough diamond, even though there was clearly some quality there. Now, coming into this season, there have been a few things that have definitely gone against him. I think it's actually quite interesting to compare Mick Schumacher in 2022 and almost treat this like his first ever season and compare it to Zhou Guanyu. Now, I think they've both been in kind of a very similar position in the sense that both Mick Schumacher and Zhou Guanyu have very kind of good teammates, very solid, consistent teammates when it comes to if you give Valtteri Bottas and K-Mag as well, a car that can consistently challenge for points, both of them are going to do a really good job. Now, I think both of them have been in a very similar place in terms of when you actually look at it, both drivers have improved over the course of the season. I think Zhou has been much closer to Valtteri and started beating him a little bit, even if he hasn't been able to score more points across the whole season. And even Mick Schumacher, especially after the first kind of 5 or 7 races, he has also improved and gotten a lot closer to K-Mag and also started beating him in some of the races and also some of the qualifyings. The biggest problem for both of these drivers is that it has also coincided, their kind of uptick in form has also coincided with the car getting worse. So they're kind of climbing this really steep mountain, but unfortunately the terrain is just getting even more steeper. And that's the problem for them, is that they're fighting against the car that has gotten worse across the season. And so it's been much more difficult to judge how well they've been driving at the beginning of the season compared to where we are now kind of towards the end of the season. So they have both made progress, but something that has been very, very different is that Zhou actually is in his rookie season, and Zhou has not crashed anywhere near as much as Mick. And that was kind of the crux of the problem for Mick at the beginning of the season, because when the car was competitive, when the car was at its absolute best at the beginning of the season, before the likes of Alpine, McLaren, and even Aston Martin now as well, before they were able to catch up in terms of development, Mick did not score those points early on when he really needed to. And in fact, he wasn't just kind of outside of the points doing nothing, he was crashing a lot. Obviously, the two big incidents we know are both Saudi Arabia, where the team actually decided to park the car for the race. They could have actually fixed the car. I remember the race talking about it. There was an opportunity to get Mick Schumacher back out into the race and set his car up and fix it all for the race, but the team just basically decided he needs some time away. That was not good. We're going to decide to just take it easy. Obviously, with the cost gap, parts are low. So they actually decided, and that is got to be a big hit to your driver kind of emotionally, to kind of park him out of the race on purpose. So that was a big one. And then Monaco as well. And the one thing I've said is that Mick was not breaking front wings, he was snapping chassis. They were bigger incidents that were clearly taking a lot out of his confidence. And the really big thing, actually, that is kind of even manifesting now later on in the season, is that I think it was around Baku where, and this was obviously right after Monaco, right after the second of his big crashes, there was a story, and a journalist friend of mine actually confirmed this, and it's quite strange to say that, by the way, a journalist friend of mine who actually works in Formula 1. So this is an actual source that actually told me that this really did happen, where basically Gunther Steiner during the media session kind of really put Mick out there in terms of saying that he needs to stop doing this right in front of Mick, by the way. Mick was sat next to Gunther and in front of all of the journalists, and basically Gunther Steiner just had it out for him. He said that he needs to stop this, he needs to seriously improve, he needs to stop costing us the money, and really kind of, instead of, the arm around the shoulder approach, it was the kick up the backside approach, and a very public one as well in front of all of the media. So that was a big turning point, I think, in the Mick and also the Haas and the Gunther Steiner relationship as well, kind of, and also the owner, of course, Gene Haas as well. So that was a really big one, because that could have gone one of two ways. Now, even though Mick did that actually did kind of it result in an uptick of form. Now, Baku was a weekend where he was totally anonymous, but he had a really good race and obviously lost out on points in Canada, and then went on a little run in Silverstone and Austria. So that did kind of align with an uptick in form, which is great. But the problem for Mick is that now the car got worse. He didn't get the brand new kind of Spec 2 car that K-Mag got in Hungary until the second half of the season in Belgium. And unfortunately, Haas have just been left behind in terms of that development battle. They've had some decent races, I think, Austin was where the car was kind of okay, but in terms of pure performance, I think he's done enough to warrant another year. It has to be brutally honest. I think he's close enough to K-Mag to warrant another drive in 2023. And I'm saying that just by the way. I'm not saying he's absolutely deserved it, but I don't really see the need in dropping him because he has improved. However, the one thing that I do know is that the one thing that Haas kind of don't like about Mick is that there has been a fundamental breakdown in the relationship between Mick Schumacher and Gunther Steiner and kind of the team in the middle as well. It's been a very awkward environment from, some of the things that I've heard from people actually working in Formula 1, that it isn't so much Mick's performances now, like in the second half of the season, or, he's obviously stopped crashing. I know he had that kind of incident in Japan in Suzuka, which, again, is not a good look, let's be brutally honest. But the big thing now is that relationship between Gunther Steiner and Mick Schumacher, and is that still repairable? Because when you have that kind of that awkward friction, between your team principal as well, the man who's kind of, running the team on the ground, when you have that friction and when your team principal is not quite sure whether Mick is the right guy or not to take the team forward, that can't fill you with confidence. And how often do we talk about in Formula One with teams and drivers in terms of being in the right environment, being supported, and being confident in your car, in your own skin, and within your team as well, to know that that support structure is around you. And ultimately, I think Mick at the moment is almost fighting a little bit against the team for his place. Now, you've also got to look at the other side of the coin as well. If you're Gunther Steiner, this guy, it's not as if Mick is scoring points and then binning it, because you can kind of, in a weird way, justify it. You can say, Charles Leclerc, I remember, had a bit of a, even during his early Ferrari years, and even Sauber a little bit, he had that kind of reputation of just being not necessarily a rough diamond, but a really fast driver who could still be a bit accident prone. But it's better to always have a driver who would push the limit, drive 110%, get amazing results, but maybe crash on the odd occasion, because you can rein it in. That comes with experience, that comes with a calmer head. It's much more difficult when a driver is both struggling to get results and also binning it and costing you a hell of a lot of money. And that's, I think, where Gunther Steiner is, quite rightly so, also angry at Mick and not quite sure, he's clearly got some talent, but has he got the consistency, and has he got the ability and potential in the future to get better and really be able to kind of extract the most out of himself and get Haas to where they need to be? They need a consistent point scorer, especially for a lower midfield team like them. They need someone who isn't going to cost them a lot of money in terms of crashing all the time, and it's kind of that balance, isn't it? So I feel like from both sides, Mick probably doesn't feel that the team has supported him in the right way. I think Haas and also Gunther Steiner also feel that maybe Mick is beginning just to bite back a little bit. You can see in his interviews, even I remember in Mexico, you can see he's just biting back at the team just a little bit, and obviously the team has also not exactly been performing at their best. Like, if you really watch closely and kind of listen into the interviews and kind of watch their race, they also get a lot wrong in terms of the strategy and the pit stops. So from all sides, I think it's just a relationship where they can't wait to get to the end, and I think Mick is just trying and hoping to hang on to that seat the best that he can. But yeah, I think the Mick thing for me, again, just to kind of quickly summarize it, it's not now about the speed, it's about the relationship between Gunther Steiner and Mick Schumacher, and if they can kind of either repair it or can get past to the point where it's not going to affect Mick's performances both this year and also next year, and there is going to be an uptick in form that hopefully allows them to score more points, allows Mick to gain more confidence, and allows for the relationship to be repaired as well. Is that what is going to happen next year? I think that's what Haas want to happen, but are they willing to risk it up against someone like a Nico Hulkenberg? We're going to have to wait and see. Now, the case for Nico Hulkenberg, the name that seems to never kind of fall away from Formula One, and to be fair, he's kind of part of the reason, because he's been... Obviously, the thing with Nico Hulkenberg, he got dropped at the end of 2019, which I think, like many people thought, was a little bit harsh, but you kind of understood it. You can say that he had his chance in Formula One. I still thought that he was operating at a pretty high level, but bringing Esteban Ocon in, I thought, in the end, actually, it's been a pretty good, it's been a pretty good kind of return on investment in terms of the risk of bringing back an Esteban Ocon who's obviously on the sidelines. He got the team their first ever win. He's kind of flying even now. He's improved even more in 2022. So over the course of the last 3-4 years, you'd say that it was kind of the right thing to do to drop Nico Hulkenberg for Esteban Ocon. And also, in terms of his cameo appearances, I think they've been brilliant. I'm almost always surprised about how little how little credit Nico Hulkenberg gets. Even when he was shafted in last minute into the Aston Martin during a brand new era of Formula One cars, having never tested these cars, having not driven in Formula One since 2020, so well over a year, being shafted in early in the season in the first 2 races. And I couldn't believe this at the time, still out-qualifying Lance Stroll in his first ever race. It just shows that he is still a Formula One driver. He's not some kind of, has-been that can't even turn a wheel. He is still a very competent Formula One driver. That's why I think Nico Hulkenberg has kind of put himself back into the shop window for this Haas seat, because whilst you have someone, in Mick Schumacher that's been crashing a little bit, also perhaps even a bit, inconsistent, not scoring the points and not taking the opportunity when the car was there at the beginning of the season to really maximize and push forward then and kind of build that strong momentum and maybe carry it into the second half of the season. You have someone in Nico Hulkenberg who's a lot less combustible. He's a lot more kind of dependable. He's an experienced driver. He's shown, in his 2 cameo appearances, or should I say, in the 2 teams, technically it's the same team, obviously, Racing Point and then Aston Martin, but in the 2 years where he did make cameo appearances, he is a very competent driver even now. Obviously, he's still on the books for Aston Martin. He did some Hungary tyre testing as well, so he's still very fresh, and clearly, if he feels motivated and if he feels hungry, that's kind of the choice for Haas in terms of Nico Hulkenberg, a driver who... They're not going to take Nico Hulkenberg to be kind of this star for the next 2-3 years. This is all about just getting through 2023 in kind of the least dramatic way possible. And that's what it's going to come down to. The stability and experience and consistency and kind of the 6 to 7 out of 10 performances that I think Nico can still give you every single race versus the potential of what Mick Schumacher might be able to become if you give him a little bit more confidence and if you give him that extra year in 2023. I think those are the 2 arguments of where the team are I think those are the 2 arguments that the team are assessing and why they're not really going to rush into the decision, because there is no other driver that almost looks like an obvious option. It really is up against a driver who's had a very choppy and rocky season in Mick Schumacher, and that has had a lot of crashes, up against a driver who isn't really that exciting. Nico is a good driver. He might be able to score points. He kind of, I think, is on a similar level to Kevin Magnussen, although, we're going to wait and see, but there's nothing exciting about those options. There's nothing where you look at maybe another driver and go, do you know what? It's worth it taking a risk on that driver instead of both Nico and Mick. And I feel like that's kind of the stranger situation that Haas find themselves in. They're choosing between 2 drivers that fundamentally are not that exciting, not really that dissimilar, and they're almost looking for the kind of the safest option, the least kind of risky option, the one that's just going to get them to the end of 2023 with the least amount of drama and might be able to score them some points and hopefully will be near Kevin Magnussen. So in terms of who would be my choice between these 2 drivers, as much as I would like to see Hulkenberg back in F1, because I do secretly think that he's actually a really good driver even now, I think he could do a very solid job, I would still give it to Mick Schumacher, because I think he's done enough just to warrant a 2023 drive. I feel like the team kind of need a bit of stability because they've been chopping and changing drivers so much. They've had drivers in and out. It's all about limiting those crashes. It's all about kind of getting him into kind of better environments, seeing what he needs to perform at his best, because it's very clear that at the beginning of the season, the pressure got to him and the team need to analyze what it is about Mick that kind of gets him into a bit of a better mindset, so that kind of takes the pressure off his shoulders. Can he kind of manage the people? Can they kind of manage the pressures around him as well in terms of his camp? Because apparently there was a little bit of friction between the people that are kind of around Mick, maybe his family a little bit as well, and the Haas team and Gunther Steiner. So it's all about managing those pressures, because I do feel like there is a good driver in Mick Schumacher. I mean, let's not forget, this guy is a Formula 3 and Formula 2 champion, and you don't win kind of the 2 top junior categories just by accident. So there is a good driver in there, but I don't think it's being harnessed in the right way by both the team and also by Mick himself. And I feel like there needs to be more dialogue, there needs to be more kind of support by each other, and I do ultimately think that there is a decent driver in Mick. I'm not saying world champion, I'm not even saying a race winner, but maybe someone one day who we might see on the F1 podium. So I think he deserves one more year, definitely not more than that. He definitely kind of needs to be tested again in 2023 and kind of almost reassessed again. But yeah, I would just give it to Mick Schumacher because I think he's done enough. I think he has gotten closer to Kevin Magnussen, and ultimately I think it's going to be all about how much trust the team has in him over bringing someone like a Nico Hulkenberg, who's a little bit more experienced. He's going to be a lot more calmer. He's got that kind of maturity that maybe Mick is still kind of learning just a little bit. But so yeah, that's my choice for one of the most boring. That's my choice for probably the most boring driver head to head for a Formula 1 seat that I've ever seen at Haas. I would give it to Mick Schumacher, although once again, I'm going to kind of repeat myself. I do think that he is, in terms of the eyes of the team, I still think he's second favorite. I wouldn't say he's my choice, but I don't think he's the favorite in terms of what's going to happen in real life. So, and it kind of brings me onto my final point that I want to end the video on, which is that is Formula 1 running out of good drivers? Because even this year, when you have an Alpine seat available, a Williams seat available, an AlphaTauri seat potentially available, and still a Haas seat available for 2023, shouldn't there be just almost an embarrassment of riches, an embarrassment of good drivers, both young and also experienced, that are fighting it out for those seats, because that's what we always talk about. You know, a lot of, in the Formula 1 community, something that you hear quite a lot is that there's always more good drivers than there are seats in Formula 1. You had Alpine choosing between quite a few drivers that, you know, some of them were damaged goods, like in the case of Daniel Ricciardo, and he didn't even, you know, Alpine in the end didn't even want Daniel Ricciardo apparently, and then they decided to go for another team's driver to kind of pinch him. He was kind of stuck a little bit, but other than that, they had to choose between the likes of Colton Herta, who obviously wasn't available, Nick De Vries, who's obviously never raced in Formula 1, the likes of Giovinazzi, and also Hulkenberg as well, another one of their juniors in Jack Doohan, and we obviously where we are now with Haas as well, choosing between, again, two drivers that aren't really that exciting. They aren't future world champions, you know, in Nico Hulkenberg and Mick Schumacher. So it just leaves me wondering, where are all the good drivers gone? And do we have almost a problem in Formula 1 that there isn't kind of a more young talent that is available to race in Formula 1? Now, obviously, some of this has to do with the super license system, that you have to go through so much, you have to win so much to even get into the possibility of racing in Formula 1. And even the champion from this season in Formula 2, Felipe Drugovich, there was not even really any talks of him being in Formula 1. You know, in the end, he has kind of become the development and reserve driver for Aston Martin, which is great. But if Formula 1 values the super license point system so much, if they love their pyramid so much of Formula 3, then Formula 2, then Formula 1, how does the Formula 2 champion from this year, he had a pretty dominant season, and to be the Formula 2 champion and not even get a look in for one of the seats? It just seems like Formula 1 is in a really strange place where they're pumping so much kind of importance into the super license system and into their lower categories, and yet there doesn't seem to be kind of this kind of next line of young drivers that are pushing into Formula 1. So yeah, it's just kind of something that I wanted to leave you guys with. You know, do you think that actually, you know, do you disagree with me? Do you think that there is actually plenty of great drivers that are just not being given the right opportunity? Or do you think we're in a bit of a kind of fallow period in terms of great drivers that are fighting against each other for these seats? You know, it should have been, you know, when it comes to the Alpine seat, that's a team that was best of the rest. And there should have been 3 or 4 really quality top level drivers that were kind of fighting all against each other. But in the end, you know, Alpine looked at an IndyCar driver who wasn't available. They looked at a Formula E driver who's never been in Formula 1. They looked at a driver that's out the sport, you know, for 2 or 3 years in Nico Hulkenberg, and also one of their juniors that also might not be available. So yeah, it's just a really kind of strange place that I think Formula 1 finds themselves in. And when I say Formula 1, also Haas also find themselves into that same position, choosing between 2 kind of decent drivers, but nothing that brings a lot of excitement to both the fan base and also I think the team as well, choosing between Hulkenberg and Schumacher. You know, it's not the same as getting a young Max Verstappen, a Lando Norris, a Charles Leclerc, a George Russell. It just doesn't seem like we have that excitement of young drivers that are ready to push into Formula 1. And ultimately, whose fault is that? You know, is it Formula 1? Is it the teams for not giving those drivers enough opportunities? I don't really know, but that's where I'm going to end this kind of little mini podcast. Again, a bit of a longer style video. Hopefully you did enjoy, but let me know your thoughts on all of the things I've talked about, both from the who should be in that Haas seat for 2023. You know, what did you think of the whole Schumacher versus Hulkenberg? And also, again, you know, is Formula 1 running out of good drivers? Why did we only have kind of the bottom of the barrel drivers you know, going head to head for the most coveted seat in all of motorsport, a Formula 1 drive for multiple teams? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments box below. I look forward to reading every single last one of them. And as always, if you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That is the #1 way that you can support my channel. And I'll see you in the next one.